Mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Blessings to everybody. As you know, this is the month of May, and the full moon is just coming up. So it's the time of Vesak or Visakha Puja, which, if nothing else, is a good time for us to recollect and remember the Buddha, our teacher, particularly his own life story. It's a time to remind yourself of that, because so many good things come from recollecting how the Buddha was born and how he came to live in the world, who he was, his family, his background, and then with that great renunciation, leaving his family to go out into the forest, all the efforts he took for 6 years before he became enlightened, and then spending the rest of his life teaching. For me, and I think for many of you, it's a time where you helps to just dispel some of the doubts that can keep reoccurring. You know, as long as we are not fully enlightened and don't fully understand the Dhamma in the same way as the Buddha or other enlightened beings, doubt will keep re-emerging in our mind until we're established on the path, what we call the Arya path, the noble path. Doubt is like one of those reoccurring obstacles, and it comes up in many different ways. But just hearing the Buddha's life story and remembering the Buddha, people find just helps to quell some of the worst doubts or reminds them of the good qualities of the Buddha, what he did, the role he had as a teacher, and so on. That can help to sway some of the doubts or bring us back to the path. There's many kinds of doubts we get caught into, and the most obvious ones are just doubts about the teachings and the path, and then our ability to practice what the Buddha taught. I don't know if you're the same as me, but when I first encountered Buddhism, it was through books. I wasn't brought up a Buddhist, and I loved to read about the Buddha's life story and then his teachings and think about his teachings. I found them revolutionary for me because they were talking and pointing to the truth in a way that was very direct, but also very clear, in a way that I hadn't encountered in my life. This is when I was a young man in the UK many years ago. But at first, I still had that sort of sense that what the Buddha was teaching is some kind of ancient philosophy, and the Buddha himself lived a long time ago. So even though I was very happy and gained a lot of confidence reading the Buddhist texts and the story of the Buddha and so on, I still had that sort of doubt: how relevant is it to me, born in this day and age? Can these teachings really help me and apply to me? But one thing that helped me a bit was at least reminding myself, well, the Buddha was a human being, even though he's an extraordinary human being. He wasn't a god or some special superhuman being. He was a human being born with the same kind of body and mind as myself, everyone else, although he did have the many special qualities, what we call the special characteristics of a great being, the Mahapurisa Laksana. So he was, even physically, he had special characteristics that you can read about. He had whorls on every finger, like his fingerprints had these whorls on them, and both his toes and fingerprints had them. He had His body was well proportioned. He had very beautiful dark eyes like an ox. He had large ears. He had a long tongue. Many, many different physical characteristics, but nevertheless, he was still a human being. And that was one of my first reflections, is that, well, there's hope there. I'm a human being. I may not be a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, but I'm a human being, so I have the same raw materials as the Buddha had. He also had a typical lifestyle, in the sense he had parents, he was brought up, he had education, he lived in the world. Although he was very sheltered by his father, he still went through many experiences that we go through. So for me, that gave me some hope and some sense of confidence, expelled some of my doubts. But for me, further doubts were expelled from my mind on seeing Luang Por Chah, which, luckily, having encountered the Buddhist teachings, not long after that, I saw the Mindful Way and The Buddha Comes to Sussex, these two documentaries done by the BBC back in the 1970s. Just by chance, I was lucky enough to see them. And that dispelled some more of my doubts, because I realized Luang Por Chah was a living teacher, and somehow intuitively I had this sense of, this is an enlightened teacher. I mean, you don't really know for yourself, especially just watching on a TV screen, but it seemed that way to me. And there was that sense, oh, this is a living enlightened teacher practicing what the Buddha taught in a way that is not that different from the way the Buddha practiced. And yet he was he was current, he was alive in the world at that time. So that also dispelled a lot of my doubts. But both listening to the Buddha's message and then also listening to what Ajahn Chah had to say, I realized, to really overcome doubt, I have to practice for myself. And if one message you get from the Buddha is practice. These teachings he proclaimed, that he explained, that he pointed out, they're not to be just believed in. Even though that's often how we begin. We have a sense that the Buddha was wise, compassionate, peaceful. Teachers we meet, such as Ajahn Chah, wise, compassionate, peaceful. We have a sort of an intuition that they have discovered or attained or gained something good as a human being. But we don't yet know for ourselves. And we have to somehow get it from the point of believing or having faith in these other figures, historical or living, and then trying to translate that into our own experience and gain something for ourselves. And that's the hard part. And that, again, that's where doubt reemerges often, I think, for all of us. I say, at every level of the practice that the Buddha was encouraging us to do, self-doubt will arise, both like in the sense, can I do this? Is this going to be good for me? Sometimes accompanied by fear or nervousness of any difficulties that we can imagine we're going to encounter practicing what the Buddha taught. And then also there's the reasonable doubt that we just don't know yet what the experience of enlightenment is, and how the path that the Buddha taught will progress. How will it affect me? How good will it be? And how will I do as I practice? Those are reasonable doubts, because we don't know, we haven't done it yet. But in the beginning, the obstructive doubt is just that sense of, I can't do this. Where does that thought come from? I can't meditate, or I can't offer dana, or I can't keep precepts. I can't do this. Where does it come from? Sometimes it's just a habit, isn't it? That we brought with us from our childhood, where maybe we had a few bad experiences and we sort of build up a negativity about ourselves or about certain people and experiences. And then we have a default mode when people ask us to do something or suggest to do something. We always say, no, I can't do that. This is doubt, isn't it? We haven't really investigated yet. We don't really know for ourselves whether we can or can't do it, but we just say it anyway, and straight away we stop, or it prevents us from trying things out. I think most Buddhists find that. I found that when I first began the practice of meditation. I had faith in the Buddha, what he taught. I met a meditation teacher who had a group, and it was quite a large meditation group. But I thought, oh, my body, my Western body used to sitting on comfortable chairs, it's just not going to cope with sitting on the floor cross-legged. And true, there was a lot of pain that came up when I first began the practice of meditation. So I really had a lot of self-doubt, thinking, I'm never going to make this. This is never going to work. But luckily, taking the wisdom of the Buddha, I started to apply it and say, okay, I do have a very physically not very supple body, not very suited to the practice of sitting meditation. That's going to take some time, I assumed. But I also started to look at my own mind, my reaction to the pain and the difficulty I was encountering trying to learn meditation. And I started to notice, the real problem is not the pain or my awkward English body. It was my thoughts about meditation. This is not going to work. I can't do this. I can't sit for very long. I'm no good. I'm hopeless. What's the point anyway? What you might call doubt. Doubt. I had less doubt about the Buddha and Ajahn Chah when I began meditation, but I did have doubt about myself. And that, in the end, that's the real paralyzing thing, isn't it? If you think you can't do it, you just have that voice coming up in your mind, then that's it. You're not going to do it until you've questioned that voice and gone beyond it. So that was my first encounter with doubt as an obstacle. It was that very thought, I can't do this. This is too difficult. So one thing I was grateful for at that time was, well, I joined a meditation group, and that's one of the the ways we deal with doubt is we get some support from teachers and other people who practice, and what we call Kalyana Mitta. And even somebody who doesn't know a lot about Buddhism but has faith enough to practice, and they know a little bit more than us maybe, they can become our Kalyana Mitta, our good friend, who we see them making effort in their practice, and we realize, well, they can do it and they're not much different from me, then maybe I can do it. And so some of our doubts might dispel. And exactly the same thing happened when I started to practice dharma. I was a student, I didn't have much money or resources or time, but I thought, well, having practiced meditation, the thought of helping out in monasteries, helping the Sangha did arise in my mind. So in small ways, I was thinking, how can I help? What can I do? And again, you get the doubt come up, oh, I'm no good. I don't have much skill, no resources, no time. I can't do any dharma. I'll leave that to all those wealthy ladies who cook all the food and do all that hard work in monasteries, or those kind of people. I'll leave it to them. But again, the sort of nagging thought was, maybe I'm not. It's not really the problem. It's not that I can't do it. It's just the voice in my mind that is expressing my own nervousness or unfamiliarity with the whole thing. So I thought there's only one way for it, is to go and live in a monastery and start practicing and see what happens. And in the end, you have to deal with doubt often by doing that, by experimenting, by being willing to try and learn and push yourself a bit. And it's just the same as anything else in life, isn't it? The Buddha himself was somebody who, before he was a Buddha, he learned all kinds of skills in the world. He was educated, and learning those skills, he learned valuable lessons. And one I picked up was, this lesson about how to make right efforts in our practice. The Buddha had this vision of a lute, 3-string lute, how when you practice, sometimes you try too hard, and it's like the string, when you tighten it too much, it doesn't make a good sound. Or then other times we're just not trying hard enough at all. We're too lazy, and maybe it's because of doubt. We're hesitant or can't push ourselves. So it's like the string on the lute that's too flabby, and you pluck it, and again, not a very good sound. We have to balance our effort in what we do. And that's another way that you deal with doubt, is learning how to make skillful effort in your practice so that you can start to see results. And the results with the lute is that you start to get a good sound as you pluck it. And whether it is a practice of dharma, precepts, or meditation, I realized I'm going to have to learn by experimenting and accept. Sometimes I'll make a few mistakes, but I'll try and learn from them. Sometimes I push too hard, try too hard, too strict. too disciplined. Other times, maybe not trying hard enough and I need to push myself more. I really like that story from the Buddha's life, his own life, because I realized, even a Buddha was learning, or prior to being a Buddha, when he was a bodhisattva, he was still learning. And we know the Buddha spent 6 years practicing before his enlightenment. And you could say, well, that was his karma from past lives, having attached to wrong views in his past lives. Well, that came up in this last life. Doesn't really matter what the previous karma cause was. The fact is the Buddha himself had to experiment and learn through his experience, learn from teachers, learn from himself. Almost certainly he would have had doubt coming up, uncertainty about the practice, uncertainty about the direction he has to go to get to Nibbana, to get to enlightenment. So I got strength from that. The fact that the Buddha himself took 6 years to practice and then had his enlightenment experience under the Bodhi tree. So I thought, well, it's going to take me at least 6 years, maybe 6 lifetimes, or maybe 600 lifetimes. I don't know. But the Buddha was like us. He had problems. He had to encounter all kinds of obstacles, what we call Mara, in his practice. So I will, for sure. And it comes back to me. And so in my practice, I was always coming from that point of view, is that if there's a problem here, really it's me. It's not the Buddha or Ajahn Chah or the teachings or the quality of the teachings, or somehow the teachings aren't right for me. It's more me, whether I'm actually putting effort into it, whether I'm really learning from my experience or not. And doubt is probably the biggest obstacle in the beginning, because if you have doubt in your mind, as I said, it paralyzes you, doesn't it? It makes you stop. You're nervous. You're not sure whether it's worth doing, whether it's worth investing the time, the effort, putting up with any difficulties, any painful feelings of tiredness, what other people say, and so on. The only way to deal with that is to practice, to do it. And little by little, you grow, you learn from it, and build on your experience. Another thing I gained from the Buddha's life is that on the night of his enlightenment, how did he begin? We went back to that time when he was a kid and meditated under the tree peacefully in a very natural way, without any grasping, clinging, without, you might say, obsessive ambition. It was more just a very natural process that the Buddha sat down and peacefully started following his breath and became very peaceful. They say he entered jhana. So the Buddha took that as his starting point on the night of his enlightenment, just to calm the mind in a very natural way, without grasping, clinging, expecting results, thinking, what am I going to get from this? How long is it going to take? His attitude was, as it doesn't matter how long it takes, I'm here to do a practice, and I'm here to end suffering and find the way to the end of suffering. So however long it takes, I'm willing to go that length. However whatever difficulty I encounter, however much hardship, I'm determined to practice. But also starting from this place of, the soft, gentle mind of samadhi that he had encountered before as a kid, something that had worked for him before. And I've always found that a useful approach in the practice of Buddhism, because there's so much to learn, there's so many texts, philosophies, there's so much to do in meditation. Sometimes it seems overwhelming, and the thought of Nibbana seems so far away, so high, so refined. Even teachers we meet, say Ajahn Chah, seems so kind of distant, far away from what we're experiencing, the normal suffering of a human mind. How do you deal with that? Well, one way is just to go back to what you do know in your own experience, just like the Buddha did. The night of his enlightenment, he wasn't enlightened yet, so he went back to that time when he was a child and brought up that same meditation. And we probably all had periods when, say, faith arose, hearing the Dhamma, or performing dana, or participating in something, or meditating, and we've experienced at least a little bit of peace in the past, at least once. That might be your starting point at those times when doubts do come up, when you're hesitant, when you're reluctant to put forth effort because of doubt, when you think you're the one who can't do it. Everyone else can do it, but I can't. I got no barami, no merit. I'm the worst disciple of the Buddha. Those thoughts will inevitably come up in the mind, I think, of everyone, because we're working with ourselves. We see ourselves, we see all our faults, all our weaknesses. We're bound to have some self-doubt, obstructive self-doubt. So at those times, you have to go back to what you have achieved already, maybe. Those little moments of insight where you heard some Dhamma and it made sense. Those moments where you did experience some peace or joy, happiness in your meditation. Those moments where you made some good karma. Maybe you kept the precepts when you were tempted to lose your temper or do something foolish. Where you gained a little victory of your mind when you were being attached or stingy and didn't want to help someone, didn't want to do any dharma, didn't want to volunteer your help, but you did. You overcame it. Sometimes we have to recollect those moments, those little moments of success or victory in our practice on every level, to help us motivate ourselves to get through the doubts and the paralysis of doubt. So sometimes we can do that. We can recollect past actions just to bring up some more energy, some patience with difficulty, and some clarity at a time where we maybe are overwhelmed by doubts, uncertainty. Of course, the other way we get caught into doubt is, just doubt about what is the right way to practice. We have an interest to practice, but then, there's so many teachers, so many Zoom sessions, so many books, so many meditation techniques, places to go. What do we choose? Well, that's a hard one. Sometimes, they say go with your gut, your intuitive feeling when you meet teachers. Or you've practiced a certain method and technique and way that seems to have worked. Again, you have sometimes to be willing to experiment and change. If something you've learned, or a teacher you've met and practiced with and found something beneficial in the past, well, even if you're going through a low period and you're not peaceful and you're having doubts, you can bring up the memory of that teacher, that way of practice that you've been taught before, that seemed to have worked before, and maybe push on and go back to it and stick with it even when things seem to be not going very well. And you see, that's exactly what the Buddha did. He stuck with the practice, even though he sometimes did have doubts. Sometimes he took wrong turns sometimes until he was the Buddha. But he stuck with that basic intention to practice, to do what was good, to do what was right, to do what is needed to overcome suffering until he had completed that task. So sometimes we have to do that. We have to trust in what we've done before, what we've learned, or the teacher we've met, until either we're proven correct through our practice and our efforts, or we receive new information from our experience that says, after a long while of consideration, this teacher doesn't seem to suit me, or doesn't seem to teach in the right way, or the meditation technique I've been using really doesn't work for me and never brings me any peace. Or I've been doing dharma in the wrong way. Maybe I've been doing dharma but with a lot of desire, expecting all kinds of results and rewards from it. And so, now I realize that part of our practice is reviewing and learning from our experience and accepting sometimes that we've made mistakes, or also acknowledging where things have gone well and saying, well, that has worked, it can work again. And ultimately, this is how we get through doubt, isn't it? It's through experience in the practice, little by little growing in experience. And so what we've heard and been instructed in and read gradually becomes our own, in a sense, our own knowledge, our own experience. And that's where faith in the Buddha and the Sangha, the enlightened Sangha starts to really gel in our minds is when our own experience starts to match up with what we've heard, what we've been taught. So unfortunately, there's that initial period where we haven't experienced much peace or wisdom for ourselves. So then we have to rely on faith in the Buddha, in the teachers, until we start to have our own experience. And then we can be a little bit more confident that we're doing the right thing. That's another reason why we do have to keep coming back to listening to the Dhamma or reflecting on the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. That's why it's worthwhile having Visakha Puja or Vesak events. It's just another time where you come back to your core teachings, to the teacher, with respect, with gratitude, remembering the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. You know, although sometimes we can get lost in the rituals, the ceremony, the events of something surrounded like Vesak, to the point where we lose track of what it's all about maybe. But as part of the practice, sometimes these things are good to have, you know, these days like Magha Puja or Vesak or Asalaha Puja at the beginning of the rains retreat. You know, every year we begin the 3-month rains retreat, we chant the Dhammacakka Sutta and remember that sutta. You could say, well, it can be just an empty ritual, and part of Vesak can seem like just an empty ritual, lighting joss sticks and candles, circumambulating. You might think, what's the point? Well, of course, if you're not really using it as an aid to your practice, it can just become an empty ritual. But if you, on the other hand, take it as a time to stop and consider who the Buddha was and what he taught and what it means to you, what it's brought to you so far in your life, and then maybe see, well, what it can also do for you if you keep practicing this path, then these kind of days like Visakha Puja have real meaning for us. They're furthering our practice, deepening our practice. So dealing with doubt, in the end, you have to learn to practice with doubt to the point where you no longer have doubt, So it's important to get a sort of a good attitude towards doubt as we go along through the practice. Ajahn Chah used to say, it's fine to practice with doubt. It's almost correct to have some doubts. If you have no doubts at all, then maybe you won't be motivated to really investigate the Dhamma and learn the Dhamma for yourself. If you think you know, you have no doubts, I know, then maybe it can actually become a kind of a stopping point in your practice, or an obstacle where you can't really go beyond certain experiences or deepen your practice because doubt is there, but you're not recognizing it. It's just the thought, I know, it's good enough. And so it's a kind of complacency even. So to have some doubt, uncertainty about the practice can be good. It can challenge us to motivate us to practice more and to investigate the Dhamma more. What is a mind that is peaceful in samadhi? Well, for one thing, it's a mind that's gone beyond doubt. So if doubt is arising, then it can't be samadhi. But what would it be like if I dropped these doubts? If I just did my practice? Like I've noticed many meditators, they have that feeling when they finally, through all their efforts, their mind settles down and the mindfulness becomes more continuous, and they start to experience a state of firmness, stillness, what we call samadhi. They often have that realization and they say, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I drop my doubts before? Because they realize how good it is when you do drop doubts as an obstacle, as a hindrance, and the mind settles. Obviously, there are the other hindrances we have to drop as well, but particularly doubt, you notice when it's gone, it's so good. The mind is so at peace. And there's that thought, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I just allow my mind to let go of all this other stuff that seemed important before? Why didn't I do it earlier? Why did I waste all this time doubting, caught into uncertainty for so many years? Many people have had that experience when doubt drops away and suddenly the mind is in a very good space, peaceful, happy. Sometimes that comes through just faith arising, listening to the Dhamma, reflecting on the Dhamma. But perhaps in a more profound way is when the hindrance of the doubting hindrance, uncertainty, skeptical doubt drops away, and the mind settles down, at least is willing to stick with its meditation object. It's not wavering. What does doubt as an experience do to the mind? Well, it makes the mind waver. Uncertainty. You can't settle down. Your mind is wavering. Is it this? Is it that? Not sure. The mind is lost. Well, they say it's like going round in circles. So the Buddha said, when you're caught into doubt, you're going lost in the wilderness. That happens here all the time in Australia. People get lost in the wilderness. They go for a short walk. They're not planning to go for a many-day trek. They just go for a walk for a few hours in the bush. But because they're not familiar with the place, and maybe they're not very mindful and their mind is scattered, they can get lost. And you have some very unusual stories where somebody is lost in the bush, only maybe 1 kilometer away from people, road, houses, and they're just wandering around in circles until eventually they're found, hopefully. So they are found in the end. But they were actually very close to civilization and people. They just were lost going around in circles. Doubt is like that, isn't it? When it takes over your mind, particularly when you become obsessed with it, you can actually be very close to good things, to the Dhamma, to a peaceful mind, to insight. But because you're going around in circles, you don't see the truth of what's going on at that time. And that's the nature of doubt. It confuses us. Is it this? Is it that? Not sure. And the mind goes round in circles. It fuels a lot of, conceptual proliferation, just endlessly thinking and thinking, trying to solve it by thinking. It's like when you have problems and you still have doubt, you try and solve the problem by thinking it to the point where, you just become tired and frazzled and unhappy and lost. And that's what doubt does to us. So as you practice, doubts come up. One way to overcome doubt is look at the suffering of doubt, the doubting mind, recognize that and say, this is the doubting mind, I know this. And to put it on one side, to say, I'm not going to follow this, I'm not going to give energy, I'm not going to give a lot of importance to this. If it's a doubt about something reasonable, you just say, well, I don't know, and it's okay to not know. I don't know what nibbana is like. I don't know states of jhana maybe. I don't know certain aspects of the practice. Fine, you can live with that. But when it's paralyzing and or just leading us, getting lost, going around in circles, well, that's the kind of doubt you have to be careful of and try and recognize. And say, I know this doubt. It's like the Buddha saying, I know Mara. One kind of Mara is doubting, the doubting mind, the mind that will stop you doing good, whether it's on the level of dana, sila, or bhavana, on any level of your practice. Maybe doing good in your family, doing good in your workplace. It's that voice that makes you hesitate or pause. As you're about to do something good, it can come up at any time. Or in meditation, it can be the voice that comes up and saying, what is this? Just as your mind is settling into the breath, letting go of all attachments, becoming very peaceful, it's that voice that says, oh, what is this? Is this jhana? Is this samadhi? And that proliferation takes you back away from the breath, away from your meditation, and back into just thinking again, back to square one. Or you're about to do something good. It could be you're about to offer dana, and some difficult kind of dana that you've planned or thought was a good idea, and then the doubt, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should use this money on something else, or maybe I use my time doing something else, etc. Doubt comes up right up to the moment you're about to do good. It can always sneak in, like a sneaky Mara gets in there. But for the Buddha, he always recognizes Mara, recognizes doubt as doubt, Mara as Mara. We have to train ourselves to do that. We have to be on our guard. We have to be mindful, bring up the mindfulness and reflect on what's going on. And sometimes you have to be sharp and say, this is doubt. This is doubt. This is stopping something good arising here. It's a hindrance, it's an obstacle. I'm not going to follow it. I'm not going to give into it. And so doubt is overcome by hearing the Dhamma, then determination in the practice, the sharpness of mindfulness, and the willingness, recognizing it. That's wisdom, recognizing doubt as a hindrance, as an obstacle, and then being willing to let it go, knowing this is suffering and a cause of suffering. What happens when we don't let go of doubt, when we don't recognize doubt? Well, doubt tends to lead on to despair, doesn't it? If you're always doubting yourself, doubting the good that you're doing or that you want to do, it often means you don't do it. So then you become even less confident, even less energetic in your practice, and you sort of go downhill. Because of the doubt, it leads to despair, self-criticism, less energy, less good things. If it's in the doubt arising in meditation, it's the thought, is it jhana? Is it this? Should I do this? What should I do next? So many people ask these questions of the teacher, you assume it must be coming up in their mind quite often. And they're just about to attain samadhi, but the doubt stops them. It's like at that last moment, the doubt. Sometimes even people have the thought, do I deserve this? They're becoming very peaceful and happy in their meditation, enjoying it, and the mind and body are settled. The mind is bright, clear. And then the doubt, do I deserve this? And the doubt leads to despair or self-aversion. Oh, I'm not a good person. I don't deserve samadhi. And they pull out of it. Very unfortunate. So doubt is like this. We have to keep being aware of it as an obstacle, as a hindrance, recognizing it. And sometimes we have to be firm, courageous to get beyond it. Sometimes we have to be very patient with it, as it's bubbling away in the back of the mind. We just let it be there, but not give into it. We just keep working until it subsides. There's so many different ways we go through doubt and get beyond it, but we have to recognize it in the first place. Otherwise, it just leads to confusion and is a blocking point. So Vesak is a very good time to deal with doubt, to recognize doubt. How much? Ask yourself these questions at this time. How much confidence in the Buddha and his teachings do you have? How much are they really a part of your thinking and your life? How often do you bring up reflection on the Dhamma in your life? How often do you practice dana or sila or bhavana? This is a good time to reflect on that, review your practice and see how often, we, on the one level, we have the mind that loves the Buddha maybe and thinks the Buddha was a good person and the teachings are correct and good, and I believe they're good and I want to follow them. But in practical daily life, how often is the mind just completely forgetting Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, forgetting the practice, and we're just caught up in the rush of earning a living, looking after our family, looking after our health, all kinds of more mundane activities, often are vying for precedence in our mind. They take over the mind so easily, don't they? And this is why the Buddha encouraged us to keep developing the path on a daily basis, keep coming back to the practice of mindfulness. One of the best things I can recommend is the practice of meditation every morning, even chanting and meditation every morning. Because even if you do have a busy life with all kinds of duties, responsibilities, if you practice meditation regularly every morning, maybe do some chanting as well, or listen to the Dhamma as well, at least you're starting the first moment of the day, period of the day, is like a new birth, new life. You're starting with the Dhamma, recollection, the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. This can bring up the right kind of attitude to practice through the rest of the day. Of course, our mindfulness will slip. Of course, we'll forget ourselves as we go through the day, forget the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. But at least if you start the day with a certain scheduled practice, you have the discipline to do that. And we have the discipline to do so many other things, like go to the gym, do our yoga, do this, do that, all our different practices and habits that we have as human beings. Surely we can also incorporate something that is truly valuable to us. Practice of meditation, chanting, listening to the Dhamma. That sets you up for the rest of the day. And it gives you something to come back to every day. Say you are lost in your work or lost in your activities and stress is arising, problems arise. What do I do? When the mind is recognizing suffering or stress or confusion, or just noticing I'm not very peaceful at this moment, if you've previously been practicing meditation, chanting, you have something to return to. And this also helps to overcome doubt. You've meditated and found some peace before, found it useful before, you've listened to the Dhamma, found it helpful, you've chanted. So you can do that. You've got something to turn to. And again, that dispels doubt. You think of the Buddha, immediately you might feel a bit more calm. You turn to the breath for a minute, say, in the middle of a busy day when you're feeling stressed, you turn to the breath, you feel calm. You become more clear, your mindfulness returns, maybe you can think better and solve your problems better, even after 1 minute of mindfulness of breathing. So this is how we can progress in the practice, even in with many duties and responsibilities, through regularly having those periods where you might formally sit and meditate and chant, and then building on that little by little through your day and returning to the Dhamma that you've already practiced. And you'll find many of your doubts fade away then. You know that you have many duties, so it's not always possible to spend all your time on retreat, or you can't become a monk or a nun maybe. But you can mentally return to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha at any time in your day. And even if you're doing some other activity, you can still recollect the Buddha. You can still bring up mindfulness. You can still be reflecting on your sila as you interact with people. There are opportunities for the practice of dana, kindness and compassion in our daily life. Somebody was talking today about how do you practice compassion or empathy in the workplace? It seems like most workplaces, it's just not emphasized, it's not happening. Everyone does their job and they're kind of focused on their work in a sense that's correct, but in a more selfish way, and they seem to be very blind to the people around them, anyone suffering, anyone having problems. Often we're very egocentric and just centered on our own business, just trying to get through the day maybe so that we can get home and have our own free time. But once you're practicing the Buddha's path, you're seeing that really everything counts. Everything is part of the practice. So you may have your times of formal meditation, chanting, spreading thoughts of loving kindness and compassion maybe once a day or twice a day in a formal way on your own. But then how do you apply that in the workplace? Sometimes we have to be bold and say, well, as I do this job and I interact with my work colleagues, I'm also going to try and cultivate the practice of compassion, for example. It doesn't mean to say you have to go around hugging everybody or going over the top, but just as a mental quality to return to it as something that the Buddha practiced, the Buddha developed, and to overcome your doubts about that by, trying it. If you have 5 minutes free in your day, rather than just looking at your phone, social media, news, or whatever it may be, why not sit there and just spend a few minutes spreading thoughts of kindness to everyone in your workplace? Whether you have clients, customers, work colleagues, one or two or many. Sometimes we can just do that as a practice, consciously bring up kindness and compassion directed to others. You don't have to tell anyone about it. So it's not something you're doing to show off or make yourself the most impressive worker in that place. But you're introducing the Dhamma into your mind in your workplace. And you're seeing the value of it, and you have to overcome doubts to do that. It's the same with precepts, isn't it? As you practice at work, there'll be times when your precepts are challenged, when you want to get annoyed, be rude to someone, or tell a lie to get out of a problem, or maybe even fiddle the books, or kill an ant or a wasp that's come into your workplace. You may be tempted to, look at someone else's partner and flirt with them. You may be tempted to go out for a drink with work colleagues or something, even though you don't really want to. Whatever, your precepts are challenged at work. what stops us from keeping the precepts partly is just doubt. Can I risk being sober and not drinking? Can I risk telling the truth in this situation, or keeping silent rather than telling a lie? Doubt is at work there, just as it is in your meditation. And the more you practice meditation regularly, the more you recognize that, how doubt is holding you back from doing good in different situations. Maybe your work colleague is suffering and you have an agenda and you have work that needs to be done and they have to do it for you or with you. They're suffering and you start getting angry because they're not doing their part, but then you can see they're stressed or suffering. Maybe that's the time just to try compassion first. Forgive them, relax a bit, relent a bit, cooperate more, see what can be done in a more sensitive way, the way you talk to them, the way you relate to them, even though your own work may be suffering sometimes. It all depends on the situation. But maybe having enough confidence to try compassion first, and still with an agenda to get the job done and meet the target, meet the deadline, whatever has to be done, but trying to use kindness and compassion as well. And as you're doing that, you'll notice doubts will arise, won't they? Say, oh, I can't do this. Everyone will think I'm weak. Everyone will think I'm a pushover. Everyone will think I'm a crazy religion person. All kinds of views and opinions you imagine because of your doubts, then it stops you doing maybe what you really know is the right thing in a certain situation. Sometimes you have to be a little bit courageous and accept, okay, they will criticize me or look at me as a weirdo or whatever sometimes. But if you know what you're doing is a good thing, that's good intention is what carries you through the doubt that's holding you back in a situation where maybe something is required. Or maybe it's nothing to do with other people, it's just in your own mind when you're holding on to a certain mental defilement, a certain obsessive greed, a certain jealousy, certain anger, a certain fear or worry, and you've recognized it as something, you've identified, this is something that's causing me suffering, this is unwholesome, unskillful, how do I deal with it? And the doubt will come up and say, just leave it there, you're no good anyway, it's just proving you're no good, and it's just reminding you that you're a hopeless case, you've got no merit, you're a bad Buddhist, blah, blah, blah. The doubt will do that, won't it? It will find excuses not to deal with the mental defilement that's arisen. So sometimes, again, you have to recognize that and then try and push through it. If you've seen the right course of action, to forgive when you're angry, or to practice kindness when you're angry, to practice sympathetic joy or letting go when you're jealous, or to practice equanimity when you're faced with criticism or bad behavior from others, say, to catch the doubt, to be mindful, to know where the doubt is operating and stopping you doing the right thing in your mind at that time, or even externally, say the right thing, do the right thing. This is something that will improve the more you meditate, because when you meditate, you really work with doubt, but not only on the meditation cushion, but as you're going about your daily life, start to recognize how doubt is an uncertainty and lack of confidence in what you're doing in the practice can be holding you back, or even allowing you to, finding the excuses for you to nurture more unwholesome ways of doing things. So it's a whole part of our practice. As you know, the first stage of enlightenment, the Sotapanna, the stream winner, they abandoned 3 fetters. They've completely abandoned self-view, viewing this body and mind as a self, a solid, unchanging, lasting self. They've abandoned the attachment to rites and rituals, external practices, all the sort of cultural conditioning and attachment to practices without wisdom, what we call silapata paramasa. They've abandoned that. They've also abandoned vicikicca, skeptical doubt. They have no more doubt about the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the path of practice. What is the path? What is not the path? Through experience, through it, teaching themselves, learning from others, and then teaching themselves, They've learned what is the right thing to do. That doesn't mean to say the Sotapanna is completely free from mental defilement. They still have greed, anger, delusion, but it's managed, you might say. They manage it through, they quite naturally want to keep the precepts, and quite naturally the intention to keep the precepts is arising in the mind. They no longer have to deal with the intention to break the precepts. They have right view to understand what is wholesome karma, what is unwholesome karma, and wholesome karma and the path is to be developed. Unwholesome karma is to be abandoned. They understand that. So then there's no more doubt. If a defilement arises in their mind, they recognize it for what it is. Oh, this is the cause of suffering, and they're not doubting about it. And then they treat it properly. They work hard to abandon it as quickly as possible. Why are we still suffering is because we still have this doubt. I'm angry and I should be angry. Oh, I'm feeling really greedy today and it's okay. I'll just give myself this one treat, spoil myself, even though I'm increasing my greed and acting in a selfish way maybe, or an indulgent way. Or more often it's just confusion, scattered states of mind, confusion. It comes up and it's like, oh, we feel defeated, and rather than working to establish mindfulness to clear the confusion out of the mind, we maybe just go to distraction. I'm feeling so awful, I got to have my nice food, or go and find my partner, talk to them, or my friend, or go and watch the movie. We distract ourselves rather than establishing mindfulness. So our mind will keep returning to these states of greed, anger, and delusion as long as we are not applying the path that the Buddha gave us. And doubt is something that will feed that. We say, I like the Buddha, I believe in the Buddha, I am a Buddhist, it's Vesak, I go to the temple, I do my circumambulation. Okay, but when anger arises in your heart, do you treat it like a Buddha, a disciple of the Buddha should treat it? Is it something to be recognized and abandoned? Or do we then find the excuses and say, well, it's not Vesak, I'm just going to hold on to my anger today and I don't care? And how many times do we turn our back on the Buddha? That in itself is a good practice sometimes. Imagine if you were living with the Buddha, if you had that merit, and you probably have had that merit in the past, otherwise you wouldn't be practicing what the Buddha taught today. With so much choice in the world, you could have any other religion or belief system or lack of belief system, available. Everything is available, but you've chosen the Buddhist path, you're interested in it, you have faith. It's probably as a cause that coming from the time in the past when you've met the Buddha. So as an exercise, today, maybe in your meditation or just as a reflection, imagine if I was with the Buddha today, how would I let my mind be? Would I be careful what I think? Would I allow myself to indulge in those angry thoughts? Would I allow myself to just be scattered and confused in the way I'm doing things? Would I allow myself to break precepts? Would I allow myself to be stingy, selfish in my behavior? Would I allow myself to not do something good that I should be doing? Would I allow myself to do all kinds of unskillful things that I shouldn't be doing? If the Buddha was here, how would it change your behavior? This is one aspect of Buddhanusati. Imagining you're with the Buddha as an exercise. What does the Buddha mean to you? The goodness of the Buddha, the wisdom of the Buddha, the compassion, or the presence of the Buddha? And really the presence of the Buddha is these qualities we've been developing, talking about today, and are developing in our practice. That's the Buddha inside. The Buddha, one who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha. Ajahn Chah used to say, does the Buddha only arise in northern India 2,500 years ago? Anyone who practices the path achieves the fruit of enlightenment, nibbana. The Buddha is arising in their heart. Even you could say a step on that path is a step with the Buddha. It's as if we're stepping out with the Buddha all the time as we're practicing this path, cultivating this path. When you're mindful, you're with the Buddha, as it were. When you're not mindful, You give in to your greed, anger, delusion. It's like you've turned your back on the Buddha. You say, no Buddha for me today. Today I'm going to go with Mara. You have to ask yourself, do you want Mara or do you want the Buddha? And it's a choice we have every day, every moment of every day. And although other people are involved in our suffering and our problems and our life, ultimately we have to be looking at our mind and saying, how much is the Buddha in this mind of that I have here? Is the Buddha there all the time, some of the time, or just very rarely, or maybe once a year on Vesak, the Buddha comes into my mind, and then after Vesak, we put him back into the cupboard and cover him over for next year. If we really want to benefit from this practice, it's time to set aside the doubts, do it, and learn from it. And that's the way doubts will finally subside, is by doing it. So maybe for today, I've given you some encouragement in your practice of the Buddhist path, out of gratitude for the Buddha, our teacher. And I hope you all continue to practice and benefit from the practice. May you all be free from obstacles, from illness, from danger. May you all develop good mindfulness and insight. May you all come to experience enlightenment.
Handamaya Dhammakatthaya Sadhukarang Dandamase Sadhu